Hebrides. She's very nervous, but I don't know why she's nervous, because she's already spoken at the Scottish Parliament and as a youth voice on the Agriculture and Rural Communities Bill and Land Reform, so we were a much nicer audience, Catherine, so you'll be absolutely fine. So can I welcome Catherine, who's going to talk about staying in the local community.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for that introduction. I am very nervous, but it'll all be fine. Sorry, the slides on here.
That's exciting.
Typical. Perfect, thank you. Okay. Okay, so for those who are unfamiliar with the Ghabhsainn Estate Trust, we are landlords of 56,000 acres of land, managing all estate business in-house while undertaking a large range of projects on behalf of the community. Our current projects range from renewables and energy efficiency projects to tourism, youth projects and community engagement events. We also offer funding to community organisations via our Community Investment Fund. So I thought I would start by saying a little bit about myself. I am currently 20 years old and was born and brought up in Ness, which is located north of the island. I've lived there all my life and I'm not planning on going anywhere else. When I left school, I was working as a trainee dental nurse while attending the Urras doing an HNC in social science. This course was online and I figured out very quickly my way of learning wasn't by sitting and listening, so inevitably furthering my education through university was off the table. The only thing I was certain about was staying at home, and as I've said, that was not changing. What motivated me to stay at home was my love for the place. I couldn't give up the peace and scenery for the city life, and being surrounded by family and sheep also contributed. When starting at Ghabhsainn, I knew this was the right step in my future. In May 2022, I started as a summer placement, then applied for their community development apprentice role and was obviously successful, because that's why I'm here. My apprenticeship is in partnership with our local authority with the aim of achieving an SVQ in community development. I am the first community development apprentice in the Outer Hebrides, as was previously mentioned, and I have also completed 2 modules, land reform / community ownership and community energy, as part of a CPD in rural community development. I've still got 1 more module to complete to receive my qualification in the CPD. My role within the organisation is varied to allow me to gain experiences to influence my future, from tourism to finance to admin tasks and community engagement events. By gaining experience in these sectors has definitely improved my organisational skills, thought process and taking responsibility. I should add, it's definitely improved my confidence, because I would not be up here right now. So I'm just going to talk about some opportunities that I've had while working at Ghabhsainn. So, from Urras to Bridgetown, Barbados. In July 2023, I had the opportunity to be part of a transitional youth programme between the Outer Hebrides and Barbados. This project was conducted by St Andrews University and the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. The aim of the youth exchange was to compare and contrast 2 island communities through climate, emergencies, culture and heritage. I was over there for 10 days, and as a Luasoch, the heat was unimaginable and I burnt to a crisp. This unforgettable experience has opened my eyes to the real world and realised no matter where you are, all islands face the same issues. If it wasn't for my managers and work team who encouraged me to apply, then I would not have been able to have that experience and to also be working in the community sector as well. So Catherine's visit to Holyrood. So in August 2023, I joined my youth local action group, and it has brought so many experiences and opportunities. There is also a local action group where members have their ear to ground and a good understanding of what is going on in their communities. These groups are part of the community-led local development, which is to support and enable rural communities to realise their dreams and ambitions. This is all funded by the Scottish Government. The WILAG enabled me to head to Fort William in November 2023 and attend the Rural and Islands Parliament. There was also a youth parliament session as well. We provided statements about what we were passionate about and presented them to Mary Goujon. This then led to an invitation to Holyrood to speak to Cabinet Secretaries, and we also met the former First Minister. And since then, I have indeed contributed to the Agricultural and Rural Communities Bill and also attended a land reform bill discussion a couple of weeks back. And success at the Film G Awards. So in February 2024, me and my team headed off to Glasgow, and we were successful in winning our film in the community sector. I helped our summer placement Sandy develop and create this movie, and I've never been so proud of us all to actually say we won an award. So there's a wee photo of us there, all happy and smiley. And my future plans. So my hope is to remain in the Urras, that's if Agnes and Gemma will have me, and further my education and experiences. I thought this saying is quite fitting and summarises everything I would like in the future. Let's hope this does not become a catchphrase. By having experiences in different sectors in the organisation, I would like to work in the renewable energy sector, but I'll just see where the wind takes me. That was unintentional. Now, this is very short and sweet, but I would like to thank you all for listening and hoping you can take something from this. If you have any questions for me at all, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll be more than welcome to answer anything that you have. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Catherine. Well, I suspect, Agnes, if you say you don't want her, there'll be lots of calls on her. So thanks very much, Catherine. Right, next, can I introduce you to David Francis. Some of you may have heard David already speak today. He's part of the management team at Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland, where his responsibilities include music, intangible cultural heritage, and community arts and placemaking initiative, the People's Parish. He's a past convener of the Scottish Community Alliance over the use of these sorts of conferences. Thanks, David.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've only been here this afternoon, and already it's just so stimulating to hear all the different ideas. Just got a few minutes, so I'm just going to touch on, if the folks coming after me don't mind, I'm going to touch on community empowerment a little bit as well. I'm going to talk a wee bit about civic and civil society, the distinction between them. Talk about how creative work can encourage agency in communities, and then talk a wee bit about the role of the artist as well. So, as you probably all recognise, every Scottish town has some once thriving building, now redundant and dilapidated, but seen as having great potential as a community asset. And up until now, communities might have been left to bemoan the fate of the asset, insisting that someone should do something about it, without necessarily being aware of who or what or how. But now, however, since the passing of the Community Empowerment Bill, the Scottish Government is aiming to support communities to do things for themselves through the application of that said bill, I should have said act. But empowerment doesn't just happen overnight, of course, and one way of supporting that process of empowerment is through the sense of agency that comes from the exercise of individual creativity in a collaborative social setting. So, community empowerment links civic and civil society. What's the distinction between the two? Civil society, which is probably most of us, it has differently nuanced definitions, but we take it to refer to what's sometimes known as the third space, the third place, the place in society that's not the home or the workplace, but is where citizens, not under the direction of any authority wielding the power of state, can have their being. It's the everyday world of social life, the voluntary association of people coming together to pursue a common interest, the commons, in other words. Civic society, somewhat different. It's the local state. It's where citizens participate in local health boards, schools, community councils, planning partnerships, and all the other mechanisms which are ultimately under the direction of the state. It's a space where citizens are invited to participate, but not necessarily on their own terms. We heard in our workshop earlier about manufactured consent, that illusion of participation. As Lawrence DeMarco, who spoke a lot about this distinction, a lot of you would have remembered him, as he once observed, structures of power militate against community empowerment and discourage it. Civic society has a tendency to move into civil society's space. And so we meet the paradox of community empowerment being authorised by government fiat. The commons is forever under the threat of enclosure. So if civil society is to be properly empowered, then citizens must develop a greater sense of agency. And community-based cultural and artistic practices, we think, are a key way of developing citizen agency, drawing on while at the same time fostering collective identity, a sense of place, surely a fundamental in any thinking about community land ownership, and a sense of belonging. So for TRACS, the organisation I work for, Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland, the area of creative practice that unites collective identity, sense of place, and cultural memory is what has come to be called the traditional arts. These are the collectively created and recreated expression of people's encounter with geographical, historical, psychological and social circumstance. And I'd include in that the processes of settlement, both relocation and dislocation. And in addition, another important aspect of the traditional arts is the practice of the musician, the storyteller, the craftsperson. It's that they project into the present a slower experience of change in a world of rapid change. So, by identifying, exploring and sharing the folk aspects of the cultural memory, communities can enlarge their cultural capital and claim cultural equity for it. Tangible and intangible assets, developed in many cases by unknown hands and minds, and which may have been hitherto undervalued, can be given value and have their value recognised both within and outside communities. And that's what heritage is. It's the conscious valuing of what has come down to us from earlier times. So we propose, therefore, that communities develop resources and tools for exploring that folk voice within the cultural memory, using it to share knowledge of the past, and to explore and express its creative possibilities for social, educational and economic benefit. Real community empowerment, I would argue. So artists are the vital force in this movement, but there's a clear sense of frustration among artists at the moment over the degree to which they feel that their contribution to to society is valued. There's a feeling that artists are disproportionately supported compared to the funds that go to what might be called the arts distribution centres, galleries, theatres, venues, etc., like this place. But moreover, the centres themselves are inequitably distributed both geographically and in terms of art forms. You go to some parts of Scotland, Inverclyde, Galloway, parts of Fife, there's nothing in terms of these kind of artistic, these arts distribution centres. Community cultural development, although complemented by the existence of these distribution centres, isn't dependent on them. And cultural development of that kind is indeed an answer in itself to that lack of equity in arts provision, in that it can be rooted in communities wherever they are. And while it might be desirable that government in its cultural strategy lays down a template for what equitable art provision might look like in civic society terms, communities and artists throughout the country, civil society in other words, can in the meantime get on with the work of bringing local culture and local history into focus, using it to develop individual skills, knowledge and creative powers in order to articulate a sense of communities, a sense of a community's idea of itself and its aspirations. So, community cultural development draws together local heritage, the learning required for its creative expression, and the sharing of that creative expression with others, empowering communities to flourish, to enjoy well-being, good health, social capital and social justice, respectful relationships with nature and with each other, and tracks through its networks and its various community projects aims to contribute to that vision. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. I think the point you're making there about developing a greater sense of agency is one that we're all really conscious of. So I now want to welcome our last three speakers for the day with their three bold ideas. I wonder if you're all happy to come up to the stage. So we've got Craig DL, who's Head of Policy and Research at Common Weal, Ewan McLachlan from the Assynt Development Trust, and Saskia O'Hara from the Public Interest Law Centre. And our three speakers today are going to talk about their bold ideas as to what community empowerment really means. So perhaps ask Craig if you're happy to speak first, and you and Saskia and I sit on the stage.
I thought I was really glad to be here, and I'm really glad to have get a wee taste of some of the conversations that we've been having. First, I'd like to point towards my good friend Simon Brooke, who inspired this provocation. It's really more his idea than it's mine, and just sorry he couldn't be here today to speak to you. But think about a lot of the words we've been using today, things like rural depopulation, housing, jobs, land ownership. These are all common refrains that I've been hearing all day. I've been hearing ever since I got involved in Scottish land reform, which is a lot shorter time than a lot of people in this room I know. We're making good progress, slower than we'd like, less complete than we'd like, but progress nonetheless. I'd just like to throw a radical idea into that discussion. We're on the cusp of winning greater powers for communities to enact the right to buy the land under their feet and around them. And we should be fighting for that more completely, more successfully, more easily, including for the right to buy that land even if the current possessor doesn't wish to sell. But there are also large swathes of Scotland where there are no communities there to enact that right. Or more precisely, there are no longer any communities there. Anyone with the right eye in the landscape of Scotland can see the ruins of houses, the rubble of walls, the eroded runs of fields that haven't been tilled in generations. Anyone who knows anything about Scottish history can point to the other countries and the descendants of the people who lived in those houses and tilled those fields. Hundreds of thousands of lives have never been lived in villages that ceased to exist, not because of accident or happenstance, but because of the deliberate choice of those with power over the powerless. So how can we return people to a land that was once cleared? My provocation is to build on some of the powers that we're looking at in the Land Reform Bill, but to say that if there is no community in an area that was once cleared, then how about we get a group of individuals who want to move there? Allow them to register an interest. Allow them to become a virtual community. Should they do so, and should they create a viable community model, I'm deliberately not calling it a business model, then they should be able to act as a community for the purposes of enacting that right to buy, with the proviso that they have to live on that land once they've bought it, at least a minimum period of time. Then the government and local authority would have an obligation to assist as that community built their homes and provide such public services and infrastructure as required. We do have vehicles that can provide finance for this. The Scottish National Investment Bank was built on the idea of long-term patient finance. It is perfect for this kind of model. And once the community is there, we can use tools like the rural housing burden to ensure that the homes built remain within community ownership, or we've got powers that councils already have to take those houses into social housing stock once the first generation of builders and community owners no longer need it. The goal through this should be to recreate and maintain a community for decades and centuries, not just to become a vehicle for developers to flip houses for profits in months. That's my provocation. It is, I'll admit, not a fully fledged policy paper quite yet. It is still just a sketch of an idea. So I welcome some of your ideas on this. So let's see if we can repopulate Clear Scotland. Thank you.
Good afternoon, conference. Here we are again. We all know the problems that blight our communities. We come together at these lovely events like this, thrash out the problems, identify solutions, and wait for action from those who control the purse strings. In the North West, we've created the North West 2045. It's a cross-sectoral collaborative network of community groups, local development trusts, statutory bodies, and community, private and NGO landowners. Our patch spreads from Oighreachd, home of the Summer Isles, all the way up the west coast of Sutherland, through Assynt, Scourie, Kinlochbervie, Durness, and along the north from Durness to Tongue and Betty Hill. We have the lowest population density in Europe, covering an area of roughly 3,000 square kilometres. That's twice the size of London. With roughly 3,000 folk living there, I share my square kilometre with 0.2 of another person. I've yet to meet them. Now, the easiest thing for me to do in this provocation is to bash our local authorities. That was the very flexible brief I was given. We should bash them for abdicating the responsibilities to community organisations. I am, however, shock horror. I'm not going to attack them. I think I'm sympathetic to them. On top of the perennial council tax freeze, my council, Highland Council, is still paying off PFI debts to the tune of £60 million every year. That's money that should be going on building homes, keeping schools open, and filling in potholes. I'm sure we all have potholes. And then there's the scale. To give you a clearer idea, it's often said that the Highlands are roughly the same size as Belgium. In the Highlands, we have a population of 235,000 folk. In Belgium, they're touching 12 million people. But with that 12 million people, they've got federal government, 3 language regions, 11 provinces and 581 communes. Those communes, like our community councils, cover everything that is in communal interest. In other words, the collective needs of the inhabitants. They have powers and funding relating to public works, social welfare, maintaining public order, housing, education, and yes, potholes. We have one council to cover a similar sized geographical area. As lovely as it is to believe that the council will take care of everything as it's been, there's an inevitability that community groups will have to take on more of the burden. So we have to create a new model of regional governance throughout rural Scotland. a system that better aligns demographic trends with public services, which actually understands the different needs between large and small communities. We do that with contract service level agreements between councils and community groups, where responsibility and funding is devolved down to the bottom rung of civic life, where everything actually happens. This needs to be recognised and communities valued as delivery partners. Funds that are allocated to that community are spent where possible in that community on local contractors and in local resources. So how do we fund rural communities taking on soft infrastructure and services? I suggest we start with the rarely spoken about grant-aided expenditure. A lot of vacant faces there. Grant-aided expenditure, that's the per head amount that the Scottish Government gives to our councils. Your council tax is just a teeny wee cherry on top. It has to be increased. It's barely risen since 2007. It also needs to be broken down to reflect the additional costs of public works in the remote rural areas and give them parity with our friends on the islands. Highland Council currently receives £2,500 per head. The Scottish average is £2,300, whereas in Orkney it's £4,000, the Western Isles £4,200, and at Shetland a whopping £4,500 per head. In the Highlands, Greater Inverness has become our central belt, which sucks in both funding and people to the centre. This is added to the failings of our infrastructure in the remote rural, where we're seeing a collapse in services, housing, and the ongoing depopulation of our working age demographic. This flies in the face of the enormous economic potential of our rural areas in terms of community wealth building by the green economy, and will inevitably lead to the levels of abandonment we saw during the boom periods of the Central Belt industrialisation. There has to be a formula, probably based on postcodes, that could see the remote rural areas in crisis benefit from a similar increase in funding to match or get closer to that of our more affluent neighbours on the islands. Adjusting grant-aided expenditure will initially take funds away from urban centres, but also grow the rural economies, making them sustainable. So how do we bridge the funding gap that currently blinds the day of whoever this week's finance minister is? Allow me to introduce to you the Japanese hometown tax, Furusato no Zai. In 2008, at the height of the global financial crash, rural Japan suffered a depopulation crisis as workers fled to the cities in the hopes of finding employment. Aware that with less tax being raised in the rural, infrastructure would suffer, the Japanese government created a tax break aimed at those folk in urban areas from rural areas to contribute to the folks back home. If we think of this in a Scotland context, it's an opportunity for our young people who head off for higher education and jobs. Gives them a chance to help fund their home communities to which one day they might be able to return. The Japanese opened up the scheme to anyone living in Japan who could nominate rural areas they had a particular regard for, where they might preserve heritage lands, forest, ecological projects, etc. When hometown tax, now imagine, there we go. Now imagine if Scotland, through our bold and ambitious politicians, appealed to Scotland's global diaspora and elicited support from their heritable origins. When the hometown tax was introduced in 2008, the first year it brought in £41 million into the rural areas for Japan. In 2021, that sum had increased to £4.3 billion per year going into rural areas. As to what should be retained by our councils, well, in an ideal world, everything. In our world, I'm quite content with the notion that councils transfer services and assets to communities where we can unleash local ingenuity and problem-solving skills to create innovative, effective solutions to local challenges. Thank you.
Okay, that was excellent. Mine is going to be a lot less detailed. So I think it's a really interesting question to think ideas to increase resident empowerment or what it means. And I had some ideas before I got here, but I was also listening throughout today to see if that would affect what I was going to say, and it has a bit. What I've heard a lot today is that with the problems and the issues that are being talked about, and it's similar down south, the answer is going to come from the community. And what we've also heard about today is that the community are typically consulted their ideas are listened to, their time is taken. However, what also happens is that at the end of that line, it feels like a tick boxing exercise. Why? Because action isn't taken after, the ideas aren't taken up. So that's kind of my starting point. And so my bold idea is this. I think legislation should be introduced to make the implementation of community consultation outcomes mandatory, or at least partially mandatory, but for some really good reasons. Because I think that the only way for communities to feel empowered, no, it's not the only way, but a key way for communities to feel empowered is to see their ideas being taken into action. And what that also does is stop the disempowering that happens of communities when they sit down in these consultation processes and think, I'm not doing it again, I'm not engaging again, which affects all of us when you're trying to just engage with people if they feel like they're not being listened to. And the reason I say legislation is that what we've also heard is that, you know, it's like, oh no, this time we're going to listen. We're going to listen more intently, whatever it is. No, we need to have accountability. And I'll stand here as a lawyer and say, legislate, and then you have some accountability. And that's that. All right, thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig, Ewan and Saskia, especially for keeping to time, but really brilliant ideas there. So, Craig, how do we get more people back on the land? Really important, something the CLS have been talking about for a long time. Ewan's great idea of the hometown tax and how we bridge that funding gap and create new models of local governance, and then Saskia dealing with the dreaded implementation gap that we've all been subject to in the past. So we've got a few minutes now if anyone's got any questions for our panellists, and then I think we've got a team photo planned, and then over for dinner. So I'm going to go to Cameron at the back. Thanks, Cameron.
Hi folks. So I think picking up on Craig's point there about how to re-people places where there isn't a community there, the question that I would have is kind of where's the agency role in that? Where's HIE in this room? And previous to HIE, what's the role of HITB? Like, what's happened there? We look forward to what can we change, what can we change in the new Land Reform Act, what can we do with any of this, but there's experience there, whether it's from the previous development board, whether it's from the hydro board. We've got these examples, and I think it ties back to the workshop earlier today about what's the economic value of community development. We have, obviously this is Highlands and Islands, we have the agency there that's around about socio-economic development of Highlands and Islands, but they're driven by business. So who's driving the community value of economic development? And you can answer that, and you can have that coordinating role of an agency that they have area offices, they have area teams. That can then help to pinpoint these areas where there is a capacity issue, there's a lack of community there, coordinate around about that, then also have that, I guess, that assurance that it's a grown-up business, it's a grown-up discussion to bring in investment into that area. So I think I'm glad that Ian didn't just lump straight into jumping on the local authorities back and criticising them, because I think sometimes it's easy to blame Scottish Government, it's easy to blame local government, and it's easy to expect communities to do everything. But there's somewhere in between all of that. There is an agency in between all of that, and a coordinating body between all of that that needs to kind of step up, but be resourced as well. And I think that's maybe, I would say, part of the next step of Craig's kind of plan there is looking at that. Well, we had a re-people agency, we had a Land Settlement Act. Go back to that. Look at what we've done successfully in the past. Portmalong, Fiskevik and Skye. We've got these examples that aren't old examples. So why do we look for new things all the time? And it would also be in a landscape of much more kind of restricted resources and finance. It's a much more efficient way of doing it as well, having a coordinating agency leading that and coordinating private investment, coordinating public investment. And there's examples in this room as well, land commissions here, they've got how to get things moving. So it's all there, it's just a case of, I don't know how many conferences this is, and we're back to the same question yourself. Why not? what's happening, where's the blockers, and where are those that actually make the decisions? Why aren't they here, I suppose? I don't know, that's just another ramble.
Well, it's a ramble that's not in the pub tonight, so that's good. No, I think it's a really good point. I think the Highlands Lines have been lucky that they've had a development agency that had a community and an economic remit. So, you know, HIE have supported communities. There's, I don't know, 40 development officers now, in a way that the other development agencies don't support them. So I'm not here to big up HIE in any sense, but I think in the Highlands Lines we are lucky that we've always had that, and that's why community land ownership has been much more effective in the Highlands Lines, and now other areas are catching up. So I think there is a discussion going on about possibly some sort of land agency or a housing agency, and you sort of sense that even though that was not a popular suggestion probably 3, 4, 5 years ago, the way that the housing crisis is now spreading throughout all of rural Scotland and urban Scotland, we probably do need something new. And whether it's an existing agency that takes that role on, or whether it's a whole new agency, who's to say? I suspect Scottish Government are not in the business of setting up new agencies. But we do need a new approach, and repopulating areas, absolutely. I think it's something that CLS have been talking about for quite a long time, but I think there's a much bigger crisis at the minute around housing in existing communities, which we're all aware of, and it's how we address the high numbers of second homes, high numbers of short-term lets, the inability to build, and Mary talked earlier on about the 10 years or so that it takes to actually get a housing project off the ground. So, and I suspect that all of these are levers that we do actually within Scotland we can control. We can't keep using the example of, well, we don't have independence as a reason for not delivering on these, because these are all levers that we could actually control. So I completely take your point that actually we do need broader action, but there's lots of things to be getting on with, and housing in existing communities is one of them. But Craig, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just to
just hold it.
just to draw the thread between your point and Ewan's point here, is one thing that Scotland definitely does lack is truly municipal local democracy. You know, we've got the example of a country of Belgium that has hundreds of municipal councils, communes, in the same area of Scotland has none. You know, we've got the community councils, we've got development trusts, we've got some glimmers there, but we don't have true legislative local democracy. And that's the kind of thing we really need to get these decisions embedded within communities. And I really take your point, that's why I deliberately said community plan, not business plan, that we really need these to be work for communities. That said, this doesn't really back up my own speech where how do you have local democracy where you don't have a community at all. So that's something that we would have to grow into. I would say that the smallest municipal council I know of in Europe currently has a population of less than a dozen. It's an island off the coast of Germany, and most of its work is taken care of by the neighbouring municipal council, but it still exists as an actual municipal council with a very low population. These things are possible.
Thanks very much, Craig. Any other questions? Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I've come up from England to this conference, and people in England really look to Scotland for what's going on in this sector. So I think I would take a lot of confidence from that. Like Wales, Scotland is a small country that it can be much more creative and move faster and try things out than England can with all its horrendous baggage and dysfunction. So what I just ask is, like, can Community Land Scotland actually pilot some of these ideas in the next year and act as a convener from that, rather than just us having lots of wonderful ideas that inspire and provoke us, actually convene some pilots. I, for one, after the beautiful weather the last few days, will certainly be up for moving my family up to the middle of Scotland and helping repopulate rural Scotland. Yeah, so a bit of action just to try that out, and when it works, then you've got a case for, you know, statutory support to roll things out.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm obviously going to say we're already doing it. There's loads of people in this room that are already doing all that. So if I look at what Catherine and her team are doing at Ghabhsainn in terms of getting young people to stay there, if I look at what people on Gear are doing in terms of building housing for young people to stay and for older people to downsize, to talk about egg again because you get bored of egg, but if I talk about what's happening on Mull and all the great work that Mitch and North West Mull and South West Mull are doing, so this is actually happening, and not just in the Highlands Alliance, but what Langland are doing or what organisations in the Central Belt are doing. The key is how we scale it up, you know, how it's not always just going to be a niche thing that some communities that have got access to existing resources, but how we can actually really embed it in the mainstream and demonstrate to Scottish Government that this is the way of delivering one of their core policies of community wealth building and a just transition to net zero. And that was the sort of the purpose of the previous session, to say, right, how do we get what we do into the language that they understand? Because at the moment it's just like quite a nice thing to do, but actually how can we demonstrate that this is a way of underpinning a transformation to a much fairer economy that they keep talking about? And again, we know that a lot of businesses, certainly in the community landowners that I know, businesses want to work with you because they see the benefit of it. They want to work with communities to build houses, and they want to work with communities to provide business space. And they see the benefit of keeping young people locally. And coming back to the points that the panel are making, you know, they're not really seeing that at a local authority level because of all the constraints that we're all really aware of. But actually where it does happen is at a very local level. And that's where, if you've got communities, if you give them resources, not loads of resources, if you just give them a bit, and give them a bit of access to resources and a bit of power, they do absolutely amazing things. And it's how we can keep telling that story, which is the purpose of conferences like. So I do completely take the point, we need to scale it up, but it is already happening. Thank you. Yeah.
Just like the last speaker, I've come from Wales, I've come because I admire what's happening in Scotland and to learn, and I don't think you perhaps realise quite how inspirational what they're doing is seen and respected. On Saskia's point about the implementation gap, there is a big gap, but consultation really worries me. It's a bad process. I've been involved in some evidence of co-production process in Wales, which has been absolutely fantastic. In fact, it was so good, I've now actually become a director of the co-production network in Wales. And what we took a community and a public body, public forestry body, and got them to work together to come up with a future for the forest plan, which neither could do on their own. So the public body just has their own commitments and normally would just consult with the community who don't understand about forestry. The community have a set of values and a vision for what they want that community, but they don't know about forestry. We put them together over a 12-month process, 10 meetings, working in the co-production, where the outcome is binding on both parties, and we got a fantastic outcome. So I think the solution to that problem is co-production.
Thank you, that's really reassuring. Go for it, Saskia.
So that's on now. Yeah, no, that sounds brilliant. My experience of co-production in London, which is where I live, and on estates, is that it's just another facet of a falsity. So how you described it was absolutely beautiful, and especially because you said the result was binding between this collaboration, and I think that's it, the result has to be binding because unfortunately co-production and how I experience it in communities is again used as a tick boxing exercise and it's not followed through. But yeah, your explanation of it was superb.
And I think some authorities are good at it, some authorities are rubbish at it, some authorities are getting better at it. And we always need to remember actually it imposes quite an obligation on the community as well, so they need to find the time and the resources. And quite often you have professional people coming in to co-produce and they're paid. You know, they're paid for evenings and weekends, and you're expecting volunteers who are not paid evenings, weekends, and have gone to work all day to come and then put their time in to produce something that public organisation can say, aren't we great? So I think there's a lot to it, and I think a lot of probably communities in the room have been subject to that, that all of their good work is taken on and valued by the public authority, but it's only valued in the sense that they can say, we've ticked a box, not that actually it's committing to anything. So it's been a bit radical. But anyway, any other questions? No. Cameron again. Go on, one last one. You're holding us from our photo, but carry on. Make it a short one.
Somebody just said good luck to that. For the first time ever, I will. So on that implementation point as well, I think I don't know how you tackle this, but I think one of the big challenges we have is the kind of political environment that we're in, and a kind of attitude towards how things are developed, how policies and acts are developed, because there is this can't back down attitude, there's this kind of gotcha attitude, so whoever is the government, whether it's UK government, the Scottish government, local authority, whoever it is that's looking at implementing change, there is this, if you don't continue with exactly what your proposal is in the first place, then you're a disaster and look at you, we've got you. Now part of that should be kind of mitigated by engaging earlier and making sure you get things right earlier, but there is, for us as, I don't know, as a nation, I suppose, a discussion around about the kind of discourse we have around about revising proposals, revising policies, revising legislation, that it's a good thing to keep changing, but we're not set up in that way. It is very much, it's a gotcha kind of society that we're in, and I think that's part of the challenge of, then it just becomes bloody-mindedness of we'll get criticised anyway, so we should just carry on with what we're consulting on and how we've consulted on it.
No, I think that's probably a really good point, Trendon, actually, because we do take a very binary approach, or I like Bridie come in, we do take a very binary approach, you're right, Cameron, and it is a lot of political point scoring, and it's really difficult for communities not to get caught up in that, but I suspect, again, most community organisations in the room have had that at a very local level, and have got the scars on their back from having to do this type of consultation, and the people that are very pro and people that are very against and are not willing to discuss. And the best community organisations are the one that recognise there's going to be a whole spectrum of opinion, and it's how you can actually find something that satisfies most of the people most of the time. You're never going to satisfy all the people all the time. But no, thanks for that point. Bridie, last point.
Just to acknowledge that in an urban context, I was Bridie Ashrow, based in Edinburgh, and on the board of Community Land Scotland. We've got 5,000 families in temporary accommodation right now. Harriet Watt met a bunch of us at Edinburgh Futures Institute. I think we've got somebody here from the Futures Institute in the room. Hopefully they came. It's going to go up by a third in the next 3 years. If you spend 2 years in temporary accommodation, you're likely to get diabetes, long-term public health problem. I must admit, this is one of the most agile rooms in Scotland. From the people I know who are present, you're bloody-minded and agile. So is that maybe one of our provocations for tomorrow, is actually to keep being bloody-minded and agile, because I think our big institutions, our anchor institutions, to use the community wealth building language, are not being, and the problems we're stirring up for the future are actually pretty horrific. So yeah, but I think this is one of the most agile bunches of people in Scotland who are really good at pulling together solutions. I just thought I'd illustrate the scale of some of that, and actually how communities had more power then actually we could actually really address this. So yeah, I just want to end in a note of optimism and agile room. Thank you.
That's great, thanks for that, Bridie. We all need more power. Right, I think we're finishing now. We're going to have a team photo. So think now, really seriously, are you tall or are you not tall? So if you're tall, can you come to the back of the stage? And if you're not so tall, can you come to the front of the stage? And then we'll be done in like 5 minutes and everyone can get away to dinner, which is at 7 o'clock, and it's at the Royal George Hotel. If you don't know where that is, ask one of the staff members with the lanyards on and they'll tell you where it is.